Hello, if you're just joining. This is a bit of a pain in the butt. I might have to start it again because I want to do it in landscape. Yeah, I've got to do it this way and it's not going to work. We've gone wrong with the 8 inches mile squared earth curve calculator for a hypothetical ball earth. And I think the trick is in how we've been programmed now to imagine it at 8 inches per mile squared. And how this now gives you 3 or 4 miles of relatively little observable curvature. So before I do that, I just want to just say hi to a friend by the name of Tom, who he and his wife I only met one time at Leicester Square, and they were very kind to us with what they said and did. And Tom is just recovering from a critical heart operation, and I guess he's grateful still to be with us, but he's gone through quite an ordeal, and I'm sure his family have too, so best wishes to him and his family, Tom, Jerry. Yeah, you're in. And I'd love to do that. Years ago, as part of my journey to realizing I needed to be more proactive, I started visiting an old man in hospital. I obliquely connected to him through through that ship, the icebreaker ship that took Channel Finds on that ill-fated, 2015 trip across. When I was connecting with him, I hadn't quite found flat Earth, but I knew about the other stuff. Anyway, I started visiting this old guy in hospital, and it was good for him and me. So yeah, if I can come around and put a smile on your face for 10 minutes, that would be cool. If not, I understand that these are tough times for many of us. Someone stopped in. I was just going to go and rerun the stream. I just zoomed in on myself. I didn't mean to do that. I was going to rerun. Thank you. You're a light in the dark. That's very nice of you to say. And I have to say my eyesight fails me a little bit, and so I can't actually even. Man knows it's flat. Is that what it says? Is that what your name is? Sorry if I'm. Man knows flat. Best wishes to you and yours. And sorry for zooming in on my head. That's really appalling camera work. I will show you briefly. I can show you just a little bit of what I'm planning to do with this stream. I'm streaming in the portrait mode rather than in the landscape mode, and that sucks. Sometimes, Sam, you're a light in the dark, mate. Thank you very much. Sometimes, Sam, thank you for stopping by. I will rerun this. You know what I'm talking about right now, guys. If you're listening and you might not know. I'm talking about the Earth Curve calculator, and I'm talking about the 8 inches per mile squared. I'm saying that I'm calling time on it being a legitimate means of establishing that science loves to imagine. So in my mind, and in your mind, I suspect, there has been this image created of an 8 inch per mile squared ball curving away from me, initially not very steeply, but gradually becoming exponentially steeper, such that it's eventually basically falling off the side of the ball, So this is the idea. Let me put something up against that. Okay, so here we go. Right at the 12 o'clock position or thereabouts, we've got a horizontal line there or thereabouts. And as we can tell, that near enough where it touches the earth, there is a very steep, initially shallow, but then steepening curvature off the edge, and eventually you're falling, what would that be, perpendicular to the original horizontal. Okay, so we all know that, and we become seduced by that. A couple of things that I've discovered when I've looked at it a little bit more closely for myself is that 1,000 miles at 8 inches per mile squared allows for actually only 140 mile downward travel of the total 4,000 mile downward travel, which is the supposed radius, right? So, having done 1,000 miles, which is 1/6 of this journey, one has only descended a fraction. Now, 1/6 of this journey is probably only about there, isn't it? In the side of this clock, on the shape of this clock. So even there, people can say, yeah, that's still legitimate. I think even with the 8 inches per mile squared, it's easy to say, off in the distance, 3-4 miles, then things start to appear to descend, and that would match with kind of what we see, what our perspective is from the beach. Our angular resolution would allow us to see 3 or 4 miles into the distance, and then everything starts to merge into one without powerful telescopes, etc. So, that's kind of what we see, and the maths of 8 inches per mile squared is generous in that respect, because it's hard to immediately disprove it. We know that because we've been trying to show it to people for 4 years now, maybe 5, and in that time, most people who've heard it have not been instantly transformed from a believer in some sort of globe to someone who knows that the water is level and flat. Why? Because 8 inches per mile squared is not a slam dunk. It's not a definitive amount of curvature for the average person to be able to see. And even people who claim to be scientists say, yes, well, over 10 miles we can see an amount of curvature. Even if it's not 60 feet, we know we're losing things, and that's good enough for us. So yeah, 8 inches per mile squared is not a game winner by any stretch of the imagination, right? But it has become our mantra. We say that this is 8 inches per mile squared, and initially, and you can do the maths, and the maths would appear apparently to be correct. I'm not satisfied that the maths is fully correct, but again, even if it was a way of reverse engineering a 25,000 mile circumference, even if it was a way you could round with the 8 inches per mile squared, even if it was that, I have a fundamental issue with the 8 inches per mile squared, and this is on this sphere, and unless we're measuring for flat spots and we're accounting for flat spots, I would say that there should be no flat spot on a sphere. There's no up or down, top or bottom, according to mainstream science and the mainstream view of the world, and that is that there's no up and down. It's all relative to, apparently, to the center. But what it is doing, I'm starting to sound like Nick from Phuket Word, because he's a teacher of these things, and that's why I put his name in the thing, Bob JERAN. Because Adam Meakin has contacted me and kindly, taken me through and shown me some of his presentations on curvature and why the curvature formula is right, because we sort of, as flat earthers, been caught up with squabbling over Dick West about what is the curvature, 7.98, height of observer, all of these sorts of things. Well, in newsflash, guys, the observer has got nothing to do with the sphericity and the rotundity of this shape here. No matter how I look at it, no matter how far away I stand from it or what angle I appear to take upon it, it may appear visually to change in size and angular resolution and so on. That may appear. But in reality, we know that the curvature of this wheel is identical all the way around the wheel. It is this one's a little bit knackered, to be fair, but in an ideal world, this would be a brand new wheel engineered to precision measurements, and the roundness with which a drop of water would free, that relative to the so-called top of this wheel and the side of the wheel, that difference on a system where we are pulling down in one direction, and then that is obviously going to be a rapid falling or a going down. But I think this exposes one of the important tricks, and I'll get to that shortly. So what we're seduced into believing is that there's a sort of, when we are at the top here, and you and I are always at the top, no matter where we stand, another bit of the magic of relativity, but where we stand is the top, and where we stand is only shallow in terms of the curvature to be observed. As the object gets away from me, then the curvature exponentially increases. And I have to say that's not the experience of a water droplet running around the side of this, is that it would be always the same amount of curvature, the same amount of bending angle of travel. So like this wheel here, I was going to set something up with using bricks. And these are very old bricks, by the way. There's a story behind them, but we won't go into that now. Whoops. Hold on a second. This is the joy of live action. Let me just move this wheel over here. See, because what we do, excuse me, guys. There we go. Is we use trigonometry. And trigonometry is a great way of getting people to introduce a top or a bottom, an artificial horizon, if you like, to create an artificial level. See, because if I was to use, instead of using this iron bar on top here, I was to go and say, well, how about that? I've created, just like every tire does, I've created on this level table, and from that flat spot I'm going to measure the amount of the angle of change or the height of change from the flat spot. Well, on a perfect sphere there should be no need for a flat spot, no pressure point, no time at which the droplet of water stopped flowing in the same way as it would do unhindered by the forces of up and down as they are here, with the density and buoyancy. So how to overcome that? How to overcome this flat spot, which, if you like, it creates a zeroing. This iron bar now is almost like a 0 point from which I now calculate the amount of curvature, when in fact I come from all the way around there, and actually the straightness of this bar is like an insult to I didn't mean that to happen. The straightness of the bar is like an insult to the intelligence, because really this smear of water is probably more pronounced in its raisedness from this tire as would be a ship on a globe 25,000 miles in circumference. So if this was our globe shrunk down water, you would not be able to distinguish between the tire, the water, and the ship. They would be all part of the same thing. And so it's on a constantly traveling or a constantly bending line. That line, or that angle of attack, never changes. Okay? I hope this is of use to you. I know I'm not holding like the biggest of audiences. You agree with me on the clock? Yeah, thanks. Hey, James, how you doing? Okay, that's Pepinator 7. So is that? I hope I got your name right. I saw your question just arrived. So why not 8-inch mile squared? So if you plot 8 inches per mile, let me just like pick it quickly. Go back. I did kind of start with this, I think, but just to bring you up to speed. If you I'll even turn the camera around and give you a full frontal. If you line for any distance, let's say 100 miles or 1,000 miles, then you come to drawing or describing a parabola. If I had a marker pen here, I could draw on this fridge or something. I could draw, because I'm sure you know what a parabola is, but actually it helped me to go back and check it out, because, you know, some of the stuff you discarded in school 30 years ago, and you don't necessarily hang on to it as tightly as perhaps might be useful in a situation like this. But I'm going to draw you a parabola. Let's see. I don't want to use that. This is your parabola. Did you see that? Can you see that? That's you. Behind you is another parabola. So I don't know if you can see that. Let me see. Yeah. Well, this is you standing on the top of a parabola where the world near you is not very slanted. But when it gets further away from you, so for every 1 mile you go along, you're dropping down 1 mile, which is a crazy notion, right? We know that the heliocentric model and the ball idea is a crazy idea, that water and all that stuff on a ball. But we're trying. Why it matters is because the model that we've been given at 8 inches, and it is a model, is one that actually many minds can envisage. In fact, we probably envisage it ourselves, which is why we're taking time to try and explain to people why it's wrong. But we've been tricked into accepting that it's a very shallow angular resolution, rather than it being actually an immediately obvious, according to their maths, an immediately obvious amount of curvature from the immediate point on which you stand. Now I'm allowing for relativity. I'm allowing for the person to be standing on the top of the ball, and therefore everything would be down from them. If you get beyond thinking just for yourself, and you realize, and this is where we've all been tricked, and you realize, of course, well, with relativity, only one person could be standing on this fictional sphere at the top of it, everybody else would have to be like porcupines stuck on the side of it, relative to me. Now, I understand that relative to them, I'm on the side of it, and they're on the top of it. So I'm allowing for that nonsense to exist, because it is their own model in which there's no up or down. So even though from my point of view, this is where we've been tricked, I think. From my point of view, at the 12 o'clock position, someone arrives to them, it's not falling down as it seems to me. It's not falling down at sort of 90 degrees to my position, which is what the 8 inches per mile square is asking for anyway. It's not falling down, but for them, it's coming at them at the 8 inches per mile in the last mile. Again, that's a bit of a head bender. There's no good reason to allow for us to obtain a model which, you know, firstly, in the model form, it doesn't work, because if you apply the 8 inches per mile squared, you get that scenario. And also in the real world, if it's as much as I think it is, according to their maths, what we should experience if we were living on this 25,000 mile ball is so obviously curving, assuming I'm on the top, it's so obviously curving away from me at 6 meters for every 10 meters. So I'm basically I'm obviously on a very sharply bending surface, just like this wheel. You see, this wheel is a sharply bending surface, and in the distance it's going to travel from there to the floor, that distance, that piece of the wheel has to obviously drop down through that distance. And that's all that I'm doing, is saying, is that actually then if I was traveling over the skin of the earth, my travel would be the same amount of bend all the way through the journey, and therefore the amount that I'm creating curvature between point A and point B is always the same. You know, yes, I agree and I accept with the point that these steps here are falling in a theoretical, which doesn't exist in their model, in a theoretical down direction. I accept that. But their model doesn't allow for a down, and I think that one of the cleverest parts of this has been perhaps how we've aligned it in a top-down configuration. What if I lay the tire down like that? And what if I said I'm going to inscribe a line, I'm going to score a line into this tire all the way around this rim. This is my globe, this is the equator, here is the North Pole, underneath the table in Magic Land is the South Pole too. But instead of going down from the North Pole like we all have been so well trained to, we are going to do some 1,000-mile belly circumference of the Earth. All we're going to do is we're going to observe it from here in space, and we're going to watch. I've got a banana here that can kind of do the journey for us. We're going to watch the banana go around the circumference, the equator. And we're going to notice that the banana never notices any change in angle of attack. Never changes any angle of attack. It is always facing in the same. It's always adhering to, by some chance, a squashed vegetable or fruit were to come and stand at any point on my equator, it wouldn't have any bearing on the travel of my banana. I'm not going to use a straight line and say that at this point everything gets zeroed again, because if I do that, I'm disallowing for all of the previous movement, even if we give 1 pixel, but we put a line down here in our little pencil drawings on a table. We are creating a flat spot on the wheel on this Earth that is, many miles long. If you were to transpose this little line, this little spot, this touching, this flat spot, this pressure point at which the wheel is touching the ground, in taking away any of the existing rotundity and curvature and zeroing it flat. And then from that flat point, yes, there is this narrow amount of slope, if you like, or the distance between the imagined horizon, the theoretical horizon in their case that shouldn't be level anyway, to this spherical shape. So the gap is smaller, and eventually, yes,
when you're comparing it to the 3 o'clock position here, it's a huge drop from that supposed horizontal originating position. But actually, it might, I mean, for me, that, you know, this is all the fiction, this is all the trickery, this is where the trickery actually happens, is because there should be no resetting of the position of the ship, of the position of the water, you know, because really what the ship is mimicking the flow of, or the shape of the so-called spherical Earth water ball. So really, it's always sort of as I said earlier, inside of the tire grooves. Really, it's that close to the surface of this. So there's no what they've done is they've kicked the ship straight and flat and said, this is the ship now. And because I'm standing here, it's going to have a measurably increasing amount of curvature. Well, I can't disagree with that. But what I'm casting out is the idea that the observer is going to have any bearing whatsoever on the amount that my banana or ship or craft or plane or whatever is going to hug, basically have our heads buried in it. And I'm sure that he loves that kind of thing. But what I'm sort of bringing to your attention here is that the curve experienced by anything traveling around this wheel or the circumference of our equator would be the same amount of bend. So my observation of it, I accept, would have a bearing depending on how high I was standing from the surface of it. Yes, the closer I get, the less far I can see. Totally accept that. But the question is now, how much should there be, and how a moot point once you realize how much there should be. Because if this is 25,000 miles around the wheel, I can segment the wheel into quarters. I can segment each quarter into hundredths or thousandths, so that I can say that there's 24,000 or 25,000 mile segments around this, and each one of those mile segments will have exactly the same amount of curvature. I think someone has worked it out at 1 degree of the 360 degree wheel should have something in the region of 70 miles of curvature, and that's every degree, no matter where you start, it's always going to have the same amount of curvature, which is a huge amount of curvature when you think about it in terms of the miles, or the, you know, per mile, how much curvature we're talking about. We are talking about, you know, 0.6 of a unit. For every unit traveled over the skin, we're going to have changed 0.6 of a unit. And the going down really becomes irrelevant when you look at it in this way, because you're not having to go down anymore, and so you're not calling a single line. You're not saying there's a single point that has to be the 0 point or the reset point for my aspect. You know, the ship is going to continue bending at the same amount, and you know, the maths for me becomes much simpler. You know, I think that my mate Adam Meakin, he tried to establish what was the drop between here and here by doing trigonometry, creating a triangle here, and saying, okay, that's my amount of drop. But what I'd say to him when we have our next conversation is that that's creating like this artificial kind of aspect to this center, as though this is important. When you do it like this way around, you realize there's no loss of height. So the loss of height is almost like a red herring, a straw man. You know, the loss of height is irrelevant in a spherical geometry model anyway. Because let me turn this camera around so I can see what you're seeing. Oh, am I holding it the wrong way? Damn. Sorry, guys. I old habits there. You know. Were you able to see all of that? I really hope you were able to see all of that. That's annoying. I had the orientation wrong. Sorry about that. Hey, Drew. Nice to see you here. John C, nice to see you. Your dog typed that. All right. Well, yeah, David Poole. That's the surname. That's where I was born, Poole. And it works out to be 0.64 of a mile for 1 mile of distance, and that's simple maths that anyone can do. I think it's become so complicated that people are, or even thinking people have gone, yeah, up to 1,000 miles it's fine. After that, we're not exactly sure. And I've said that myself. Maybe I'm not a thinking person though, but I have fallen foul of going, yeah, okay, there's a little bit here, and then it gets more, and then it gets more. Well, no, I'm afraid that's got nothing to do with you. Where you stand cannot affect the nature of your perspective on it and make it seem as though it's something else. But when you approach it, it's still the same thing. And curvature is, unfortunately for the ball, is very much a fixed facet of their 24,000 mile ball. So I think we've been suckered into a way of looking at it that belies the true nature of what it should be were we to be living on a 25,000 mile circumference. It's a 4,000 mile radius, so it demands all of these things. It demands for you to have changed through, whatever your distance, you're 180 degrees. You're here and you go down to the bottom at 12,000 miles away, and you're 180 degrees from the point at which you, if you quartered this wheel, that would be about 6,200, there or thereabouts, and that was 6,000, and this distance we know is 4,000. I think because it's the whole issue of creating triangles that causes the problem, because it's not a triangle that you're traveling on. It's this bulge, relative to this. Dave, cool. Well, thanks for that comment. Anyway, I do appreciate it. I don't know. This person for sending me a video from JERANism. JERAN, if you're ever hearing this, good work. I could have met you in Amsterdam, but it just never played out. But I'm sure if we had, it would have been fun. No matter. And Bob, because I do really respect your work and show and stuff. But I'm thinking that this 8 inches parabola is a load of crap. It cannot exist, and therefore we've all genuinely bought into the misdirection. Now, it couldn't really work in reality, but that the alternative, this more simplistic way, is worth pursuing, because when you confirm it, when it's been, and this is what good science should be, is others saying, yes, we've looked at that, and in theory it should appear to be that. If we can come to a consensus on that, I mean, there's two prizes here. One is, we realize that this is not a flat earther formula. The 8 inches mile squared is a globe Botham went to prove against with the Bedford levels. And others are still doing to this day, which, someone behind the curtain is sniggering, because here we are trying our best to show people the 8 inches per mile squared over 10 miles, over 6 miles, etc., when in fact we shouldn't have to look out more than a mile and be obviously on a ball. It should be so painfully, discomfortingly obvious that we were on a ball that there'd never be any doubt. But the maths that we've been given at 8 inches per mile squared leaves plenty of room for doubt, which is why we've struggled to convert people based on the numbers alone. It was a good thing for me. It was the thing that I used first and foremost to prove to myself that there was no 8 inches per mile squared, and I accept that there's no 8 inches per mile squared. there's no curvature, it's just a matter of optics that messes with what we see. But I accept that. But I say that if the square, if it's not a squared number, it's just a constant number, what was it, Dave? 6.2 per unit, per kilometer, per mile. It doesn't really matter. That's the great thing about it is that you're in a ball, essentially a part of the skin of it. You know, you wouldn't be able to discern you from, as I said, smear of water. Whoops. Sorry guys. I'm using let me just upgrade a little bit. I've got a brick here. That should do. Zoomed in as well. You don't need that. How did I do that? I managed to zoom in? I don't know. Sorry guys. I hate to be so slack. Anyway, the point is that we are inside of almost the rubber of this wheel. That's how close we are. The atmosphere of this Earth is only, meant to be like this thick above it. So anything that's traveling on it is at this ratio or this level is actually inside of the wheel. And the wheel, as we know, is going to bend evenly always at the same amount. Now, is it too late in the day? Does it matter? Well, if it's wrong, if the 8 inches per mile squared is wrong, we need to rectify that. We need to clarify that. If that's wrong, to say, oh well, it works in that, well, how does it work? Because what are we comparing it to? Simply a model on a piece of paper. There's no world that we can go to other than in our minds, in which the water is bending like a computer game or a Disney show or something like that, so that we've been led to believe. Thank you, Ava. If we've been led to believe that the world near me looks like it has very little curvature, even though we know that there's a whole lot more eventually far away from me, is a very self-centered view of the world, because there are billions of us and each of us has that same view. And if that's true, then it can't be as big as, or it can't be the dimensions, they say, because everybody's encountering these flat spots, relatively speaking, albeit small, you might say, in the scale of the Earth. It is a flat spot here and a steep spot there, which is why this model of going around the wheel lying in a horizontal position, I accept that, but it never, the amount that my finger is going to lose the thing nearest to it is going to be bending at exactly the same amount all the time. One of the other tricks that I think has been employed with this is the clock setup. The clock, we're always using the clock model. We're putting a line. Oh, guys, I'm going to speak to my technical team about this. It's really not good enough. I will, in due course, raise the game, raise the bar. But I need to get this one out of the way. I really do. I need to resolve this. I mean, guys that are good at maths are going, no, fuck, it's the fucking, you don't understand trigonometry, mate. That's your problem. You don't understand trig. Well, perhaps. I did it to a reasonably good standard in high school, but it never really fully kind of, grabbed me. And I think just like any of these other fields, that the more that it grabbed you, the more likely you're going to see a very clever set of formulas and rules, and then we get the answer. Well, I'm saying turn your ship into the end point of this, okay? And instead of concerning yourself so much with the height, yeah, and the up and down, what if we let them use their own rules against themselves? And that is to say that relativity demands that the second hand is always at the top. The second hand is always at the top, meaning that I'm never going down. It's not about whether I go down, because I'm not going down anywhere. I'm always at the top. There is no, one up and down. My up is always up. My up is always facing perpendicular to the sky and to everything around me. So I'm like the second hand. I'm less concerned about you. You're the 11 o'clock and down you go. You're moving against that. Have I broken the clock? It's catching up slowly. See, even the clock doesn't really like the idea of being a wheel that's turning, and then essentially the relativity is demanding that the person and the ship stays at the top. So the observer is like the hour hand here, actually simply moving away from the thing being observed in their model, in their Disney version of reality. And the ship is staying at the top. And so everything is rolling at exactly the same degrees per hour, per motion of movement, per unit of movement. Okay. And as I say, I think that if you apply it in a sort of level, on a level playing field, if you like, and just watch the second hand go around the circumference of your clock, you'll realize that it's never changing its angle of attack. Never. Not for a nano, not in a nano amount is it changing its level of attack. It is the most perfect, as we know it, sphere being inscribed by the second hand of your clock. The angle, therefore, between one place and another can be very easily calculated by reducing this perfect sphere into 24,000 measure. We call them miles. And we will know that between each mile, 1 mile and the other, it doesn't matter where you pick, it doesn't matter where you stand, it'll be the same amount of bend, of sphericity, of curvature between each second, each mile. Forget the height from some imagined center or imagined bottom. There isn't a center or imagined bottom. It is only you at the top, and the world is observed from above, and everything is below you, according to this magical model that we all got brought up with. So I'm saying that it has to be a much more simple and a much more dramatic curvature between object A and object B. If you're still struggling with the concept of the 8 inches per mile squared and wanting to cling to it, can I ask you to consider the following things? Firstly, obviously, it was handed from books, and in some cases, very well-informed men and women, mostly men, and good thinking mathematicians looked at the maths and said, yes, the math is right, the maths works. And as a mathematical equation and so on, I can't really argue against it. But trying to imagine a reality in which I was on a sphere, I realized that the 8 inches per mile squared has a lot of questions that it can't answer. And one of them is this. If I observe a ship traveling from me and I can see it for 500 miles, according to the spherical model, I should be able to go 500 miles. the first mile, the ship is going to descend 8 inches according to the model. So because of these tricks I've been showing you on this thing, I've been able to zero the angle of attack. And so for the first mile, 8 inches. For the next mile, 24 inches, etc., etc., until you get to a total of 66 feet at 10 miles. And I forget the number of feet at 500 miles. It escapes me right now, but we know that at 1,000 miles, it would be like 66,666 feet. But at 500 miles, the 499th mile, according to me, would be much steeper than the first mile. The first mile was 8 inches, and the 499th mile would be 135 feet or something. It's been a while since I looked at the numbers. The point is that we're claiming that my perspective is affecting the reality, when in fact my perspective has nothing to do with the reality, and the reality that they're trying to impregnate us with, or have done in some cases, is one in which it's a perfect. And as we've demonstrated, if we're a droplet of water on the top of this and just turn it, well, that marble would stay in exactly the same position, and it would know no bumps or no change of aspect because someone happened to watch it. It would be a perfect journey, a perfectly bending journey all the way around. And that's really what my ship on a globe should expect. The same angle of attack. I'm always at the 12 o'clock position. I'm always at the top. I'm always at the center, whatever. Which maybe you are, but in relativity terms, they're getting you to think that, well, no matter what they're getting you to think, the point is that the 8 inches per mile squared leaves you with a parabola. It leaves you with, you're inscribing a U shape, an N shape, an upside down U. Is really what a parabola is. Once you've inscribed the U or the N, upside down U, and you do another one underneath it that I suppose should complete the circuit, and that should be the globe. But of course, that would need to get more than a few hundred miles away and realize that the 8 inch per mile squared has created a flat spot on a globe that's meant to be a perfect sphere. And that flat spot doesn't deserve to be allowed to exist if we are looking for the truth. It should be a spherical thing, and using straight lines has been part of the trick, and using these up and down points of references has been part of the trick. Just these two wheels rolling against each other. At what point should I be choosing, like, for these two spheres to take a straight angle or a straight line? There isn't any. And so the curvature, the benditure, if you like, is always going to be the same, mile to mile to mile to mile. That's what I'm saying. Not only that, there is almost no point in trying to say, well, it's about the amount of height dropped to the center. Because you never really drop any height to the center. You never get any closer to the center anyway, do you? You're always at 4,000 miles of radius. So that's really not a good way of even thinking about it. And I was thinking about it as a way of trying to prove this point. But I don't think I think that's part of the trick, anometry. It is as simple as breaking this down into segments and saying, well, how much is the segment going around, and therefore that roundness is measurable. It is on into the distance, and it should be such a steep slope. It's taken me weeks now of thinking it like this to realize it differently. But really, we've been given a picture at 8 inches per mile to get you to kind of picture in your mind something that has a semblance of reality, which is one in which things are more like a pond near me, and then you drop off into the rapids, and then eventually you're on a waterfall. Things are falling basically like that because of oh my God, it's just another trick. And I'm hoping that, I mean, for me, the 8 inches is a trick. Is it 1 mile and 0.6 miles down? I think so, but I would love very much to have that peer reviewed, and channels like the Globebusters types and the JERANisms. I hope that these guys are up for. Said as much in his video, so hopefully if you know him, you can just shake him a little bit and say, hey, why don't you have me over? I'll have a chat about it. We can talk it through. One, to debunk the 8 inches per mile, a deception, and to reimagine in our mind, and that all around me there had to be such. Obviously we couldn't live on something like that, but if I got a ball nearby, here's one here. I mean, this isn't a sphere, is it? Let's just get that out of the way. This is more of the oblate spheroid, and this might be how the electromagnetic. When Neil deGrasse Tyson lies about Earth being an oblate spheroid, he's probably telling some truth, I think, about that. But cut this through on the inside, shoof, open it up, and that's what I think we're on. But if you were, I don't know, man, they've just so it got you to think, well, yeah, because if you were on a globe, only one of you could be up here. I know your friends over here are struggling to hang on to the side, and down here in front, apparently this is Africa, under here, and Australia around the back end by my thumb. Okay, it's so ridiculous when you look at it like that, and you know that. But the amount of bulge that you would be encountering if you were living anywhere, whether I rotate this to be on the top, the amount of bulge is much steeper than you've been programmed to think it is. Okay, and I can't deprogram you. Only you can deprogram you. And again, my friends, the more that you're into the trigonometry way of looking at this, I think the harder this is going to be for you to accept. But it's a perfect sphere, and until you press this onto a table and create the false kind of horizontal and all the angles that be used against us, that comes as a consequence of that. Until you do that, you don't have any reason to change the trajectory of anything that moves around this disc. Do that, and you create an artificial horizon, an artificial environment for the obfuscation. But actually, it doesn't matter what you do. There should be the same amount, and this ratio, by the way, would apply to this little clock as the same as it would the tire and the Earth. The ratio of it's so many units over and so many units of change of angle, and that change of angle becomes an obstruction. Now, when I do think about that at 0.6 to 1 ratio, then I think, gosh, so if I was here on the top, I would be looking down all around me, and I would be able to see for tens of miles perhaps, because it would be a little bit more, you had less obstruction of land and so on, so you got even further than the 3 to 4 miles that they say, or 2 miles or 1 mile if it's the Black Swan video, that they say, and all of that argument, by the way, over the Black Swan would go away in an instant if people realize that actually it should be almost like standing, the falling beneath you, and that's what I think you would experience actually on globe. The dimensions that they say would be, everything would be puffed out and blown around you, whereas we've got this very much. It's flat where I am. I know I've got this upside down, but that again is part of the trick, isn't it? They've just simply put it on a table, but as they flattened it against a table and said, now measure from there. That's the amount that, of course, and as the wheel moves over the surface, well, it becomes the flat spot. But we know that that's not the amount that this thing is curving. We've created an artificial indentation. So yeah, there you go, friends. That's it. I want to. It helps people. It might help people to see it that can't see it. And again, people say, "Oh, why does it matter?" It matters because they did it to us. System, it has done to us so many deceptions because there was a value in it to them. The system. So heck, if this is a deception, and I'm saying that it is the 8 inches mile squared is a deception, clever one, suckered many clever people in. But if it is a deception, then it's important. And it's one that we've been hanging on to for the longest times. And it's one that we're using as evidence to support our claim that this is not a globe. Well, it's important that we bring the very best evidence to prove that this is not a globe. And I'm suggesting to you that 100 meters, the 100-meter final, should have a 60-meter drop to it from the point of the start. Not only that, it should be 60 meters down behind it too. It's a very big ball. And so the dimensions, the amounts that things are going down and around are significant. Olympic Games, basically that went counter to that, like that went up 60 meters eventually. Just to make a circle horizontal, no line. It's hard to rethink, and this is really where, because people have given me the plate model, just trying to segment a plate and stuff like that. Well, do that, but when you make it up to 25,000 miles, then every millimeter here is many miles of changed angle and changed ratio of aspect to a point of an observer. It is what it is, my friends. I can't offer much more than that at this point in time, other than say, I'm hoping to talk about it more, get the word out. I was gifted the afternoon off today, so been quite a rainy day out here, and they were like, now you worked over the weekend and you can have today off. So thought, well, what better opportunity to make this video? Either that, or I'm gonna have to go and cut my hair. It's well overdue a bit of a trim. What do you think? Stacey B, hi. Tracy Butler, much love all. I think my calculation is 14 degrees per hour. Okay, well, yeah, that's easy, isn't it? That's 24 hours into 360, isn't it? Something like that. So fine, and it's it is what it is. That's right. It would be exactly the same amount of degrees per hour of change and so on. And the idea that I can stand and observe something and change the amount that it's going to, we know that. We obviously know that we can't, but we've such a clever ploy, because we can see things for 3, 5, 10 miles. It's sort of obscured the obviousness of the amount of bend that something should be enjoying because it's sitting against the water, It's all of it is theoretical. The globe is theoretical, obviously, but to then leave the globe and say we're going to apply a sort of, as I said the other day, planar geometry, flat lines, or horizontal lines, we're going to apply that to a ball to establish something is in itself part of the trick. because it bears no relation to the sphere, the horizontal line. And even the idea of a horizon that means flat and level, I've had people argue this with me in the street, say it doesn't mean flat and level. Well, it does mean flat and level. A horizon means level and horizontal lines never join. But anyway, this is where I think that they've tricked us, is to get us to use greater complication. So other people have said this before me, that there's an angle. It's a second hand going around a clock. But I think the understanding of how they've tricked us depends on realizing. Sorry, guys. Good Lord, that's horrendous. The trick is, don't give the observer any special privileges in terms of the way that the ball is shaped. Well, locally, and allow for the ball to turn instead of the ship, or as I did, put it into a horizontal frame of reference, and that way, when you go around it, you never have to think about height that you're losing. It's simply about the angle between two positions or two places, and that kind of, that bend, that curvature, that true curvature that exists on this theoretical marble. So I hope that's useful. Broadsword, though, anything that spins in our heads is trying to figure out all this bullshit. Yeah. It's a bit of a head spinner, but you know why I'm so passionate about it? Well, one, as I said, it has to be important. If they've misled us on the 8 inches per mile squared, and we're all banging drums about 8 and 7.98, and it works to 1,000 miles and all this crap, well, then it matters that we stop saying that. And actually, when you start to, and it, I'm not saying it happens overnight, but when you start to realize the theoretical, what would be the theoretical realities of a globe of that size, it should be like the neighboring farm from where I am should be well down the slope, well down the slope. You never really imagine yourself on the side of the globe, and then everything is sort of, not everything, but there's things that are actually up from you, back up from you. I mean, of course, it's all, hasn't won 8 inches miles squared, hasn't won the support of many people who've been presented with 8 inches per mile squared. If you present them with 3,000 inches in the first mile, and another 3,000 in the next mile, and another 3,000 in the next mile, then about 3 miles out, it's unequivocal. There's no need for long-range lasers. There's no need for anything. And not only that, it's like the ship came up from behind them at the same rate of curvature. For them to be at the top, the ship had to be behind them and down from them as it arrived to their point of observation by 3,000 inches in the mile prior. So hopefully it actually simplifies, because that's what the 8 inches per mile squared is designed to do, is to confuse. Hopefully it actually simplifies it and increases the ratio with which people are able to break from the bullshit. And of course, if we're in our enclaves squabbling over, whose laser test was the most accurate, or whether National Geographic are not full of shit, all of that goes away, and then it becomes quite easy. I mean, guys who are really good with the graphics stuff, they put this into their graphics programs and draw us some images. I remember that one image that we had in the early days of someone leaving the surface of a flat earth and someone leaving the surface of a globe, and it was always a very powerful image. It was like they used like a yellow and blue pattern lines, I think, and one looked like a hot air balloon, like you were leaving a hot air balloon. Well, in some ways, it should be that obviously steep that it feels a bit like that, So if we can demonstrate this to be accurate and maybe simplify our work and improve the ratio of conversion to truth. Not that flat Earth is all, she wrote, and of course I'm reminded of that by Andrea and by the world, It's not all about flat Earth. There is so much more. I'm busy loading a video as we speak from I went to Norwich yesterday, and I wanted to do some activism, but I didn't have the moment. I didn't have the footfall. I didn't have, it was windy where I was. Maybe my bottle wasn't in the right order, but there wasn't really ever anywhere where we were anyway that there was much footfall. But I did find some hoardings on what seems like a busy part of the town, and I had a little bit of chalk in my pocket. So I wrote a few bits and pieces on a thing, which you can see on the video that I drop later on, or it takes hours to upload. That's why I thought I'd just do this live, because if I made a video about this and it was 45 minutes long, it would take me until tomorrow to upload it, even longer. So, as I said, we have another week in this place, and then after that, we're on the road again. Not sure where, but obviously I'll try and keep you up to date with that. And we'll see where it leads. I was hoping to be in Portugal sort of end of February, early March, but for a few months of hard labor and what have you. But at the moment, that's not on the cards from a financial point of view, more than anything else, I think. So we'll see whether that can materialize, or whether the flat Earth will do what it has to do, and I will do my part to be a part of, waking people up and so on. But I can't be lost in it. In flat Earth, there is so much more to us, and so much more to the story, the spiritual side and the divinity aspects of our. Because these are all lies, Everything we're dealing with is the deception, in detail. We have some of the broad brush stuff, we think, but it's still very much in the world of hypothesis, and what's more certain than any of those hypotheses is the truth that this has been controlled. All our information, all our knowledge, all our schooling, all our vaunted degrees in education and qualification and so on is, chainsaw or woodcutter license. I'm not sure what the proper name is for it, but he went through training, and I think there are times when having training is important, and skills. We need to be trained and skilled, for sure. But the nature of how this world is made up has been occulted, hidden, and it is absolutely not about money. Power and greed and all these things, they are the tools that the machine uses to keep us in fear, to keep us vibrating low, to stop us from having or maybe inspire us to
to be the change, to become something optional, absolutely optional. But there are so many traps that and tight spells over the minds of the masses that it does feel a little unfair that information is not being given out to people. And that's why we need to do things like street activism and flyer drops and leaflet drops. So we'll see where it all leads for me, where it goes. Oh, hey, there's Bob. I mentioned you earlier, Bob, and your name is in the thumbnail or the title of this video, my friend. This, information I'm trying to review stuff that I know people have already reviewed, so people will feel kind of like, hey, we've kind of got this down. But I've become very uncomfortable with the 8 inches miles squared in the last little while, and the more I became uncomfortable with it, the more I was seeking for what else could it be. And so this video is a little bit of that. It's a bit long-winded, so I do apologize for that, Bob. But I spoke to Adam Meakin the other day, and he's a very bright man, and he's done the maths on this, and we haven't spoken again, but I wrote to him and said I'd be willing to talk to you again, because I'm not convinced that, as much as you're certain that the maths for 8 inches miles squared is good enough, has been cleverly applied to mislead us once more. And it matters, I think, because the difference between the 8 inches and the straightforward, what is the spherical journey of a dust mote on a tire, as it follows the way around the tire, or a ship on a globe. Then that travel is going to be equal throughout the journey, because that's the nature of being in or on or of a sphere. And so if you go back over this video, hopefully you find it useful. I am keen to talk about it more, maybe be pointed out where, the maths boffins do intimidate me a little bit with their, it's the cosine of the leg pull over here, and a bit of that and a bit of this. Well, that doesn't really have any bearing. And again, going back, if you go back over this video, my friend, then you will see that what I've pointed out is a couple of accommodations that we make when we measure the ball, because we do it on a planar, horizontal, aligned piece of paper, which wouldn't have any bearing on a relativity water ball. So yeah, just give it some thought if you don't mind. I don't want to, keep you guys too long. Everybody's got works. Oh, Bob's talking. Oh, damn. I'm familiar with my curve. We thought the same thing 3 years ago and discussed it in depth. I like you thought the curve should have been more like 6.36 per mile. Okay. And just thought it should be, JERAN thought it should be 3.8. I actually saw his video the other day. Someone sent it to me, so I have seen him say that. I'd be interested to know why we were about half apart from each other. Upon further reflection, I think JERAN was right, because you have to take the entire circle into consideration. Okay. Anyway, 3.18 makes more sense because it remains a constant. I heard him say that. I wonder if it's because you've got to halve it. And one might say that at the zenith, the apex, or whatever, that first distance around you would be half of it. But again, I would like. It's hard to kind of unpick that in a one-way conversation. Perhaps we can have an offline conversation about it. Let's see what else Bob has to say. Joey Rocha is, you're a very generous guy, aren't you? Nice to have you here.
Yeah. Globus is a living memory. And hi, Ricardo, nice to see you, friend. So look, I think hi, Ricardo. Yeah, I think the even if we can't agree on where it comes to the curvature, the observer and their experience of the curvature, it should be an experience based on the nature of the object being observed, never based on the observer itself. As I said, it'll affect the ability to see a distance. We understand that angular observer should not be able to affect the observed object. This is the key. And when we take observer into account and say they're going to, the ball's going to the ship, this is how we've done it, right? Remember, we're measuring a ship 3 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles away, or an oil platform 9 miles away, or whatever it is, and we're then applying the maths of 9 times 9 times 8. We're applying that math and saying that's what the curve should be at that point. So we are saying that the ball is curving less physically than it is elsewhere because I'm observing it. The key here is that I might be able to see the 9 mile away oil deck more easily from 100-foot vantage as opposed to being on the beach. That I absolutely accept. That I accept works in any scenario, whether you're looking downhill at a globe. And that's really not to be contended. What you can calculate is that once you know how much curvature you have and how far away something is, and therefore how much lower it is than you can calculate certain things based on the perspective of an individual. But we start from the premise that the ball, we start from the premise with the 8 inches squared. We start with it cannot be. And so that's the first thing to say. The second is that the parabola that we inscribe at 1,000 miles or 2,000 miles or 3,000 miles is now describing an almost perpendicular fall from the position of the observer. That's not a reality. Perhaps, as I said earlier on, you might have missed this, Bob, but if you forced the ship to move down the clock from 12 to 3 o'clock, then you are forcing it into a physical change of angle of 90 degrees, etc. But the reality of the model as we're given is that the ship is always at the 12 o'clock position because relativity. And therefore, the ship is not really actually moving down. It's not really changing. It's never really in the. Again, we're talking hypothetical, but in the model that we're given, the ship should always push it down the clock. Whereas what I've done with the going around the equator, put the tire on the side as I did earlier on, go around the equator. You don't have to account for any drop, any fall towards the supposed floor, which there isn't. There's no up or down in space. So, in their idea of space. So the ship must stay at the 12 o'clock position, and essentially the ball should roll back behind it. And that rolling amount or the turning amount has no bearing on me watching it. It is always going to roll at X degrees per hour or per mile. It's going to do the same amount of curving. So break the clock into 25,000 little units, and it's going to be exactly the same amount from unit to unit as the clock rolls back off the 12 o'clock position. So you don't have to, to me, you don't have to account for a physical drop, I think, in the same way as we're saying that there is a bend or a curve ahead. And so, take the waist belt version of going around the equator, and then, you're not falling down, but you're always bending. Why does it matter? Because, we're out there telling people in the world, Mark Sargent, millions of people heard 8 inches per mile squared, and we now know that the 8 inches per mile squared creates a flat nipple or a flat spot rather on the place that you're standing. And all around me is a fairly level playing field. 8 inches is not a lot, over a mile anyway. It's not an awful lot. So we obfuscate by doing this the true nature of this ridiculous reality of a 25,000 mile ball. We obfuscate it, and we allow for there to be so much room in the discussion that I had a guy come to me on my channel the other day and say that the 8 inches per mile squared isn't there. Now, I'm a firm believer in the Bedford levels experiment. I know that water is level. I know that obscuration is a matter of fact for angle of attack or resolution, angular resolution. No issues with those things, but it allows there to be enough room for wriggle and squiggle by the ball earth community. But now if we can demonstrate where they've gone it wrong with their 8 inches per mile squared, I think it would look worse for them than for us. If we have, you've obviously been thinking about this for years, and I've been busy with other things. But I'm thinking about it now, and I feel like I'm meant to try and shake this one out of the trees and get people to think about it. If I'm wrong, well, I accept I could be wrong, but I think the 8 inches mile squared is absolutely wrong. And you may not have seen me do this, but this is what we've done essentially with the 8 inches per mile squared. Is we've created an artificial table upon which to create a flat spot for the tire, and that is where you get these angles from, and this position of wanting to measure up from that, and how the angle is initially much steeper. But all of this is part of the fakery. Everything that's sort of underneath it is part of the fakery, because there is no flat spot. It is always the same amount of bendagery. You missed this earlier on. This is our parabola. This is the increasingly steep model versus an always the same amount of steepness. So guys, what have I missed? How did I why have you not, if you're still there, Bob, why have you not won this debate? I would have thought Bob says to get a large beach ball, easier to physically measure the drop versus the forward distance. You will find you are correct. See, I love it when Bob from Globebusters says I am correct. That is a special moment. I'd like to say it's brought a tear to my eye, but this is just a little itch. No, that's why are we still talking in terms of 8 inches per mile squared? Why are we still testing for 8 inches per mile squared? Why have we not been able to make the argument, or the, I know it's all theoretical. Why have we not been able to make the argument stick? I spoke to Cami a while ago, a few months ago, on Skype or one of those platforms. I'd love to talk to you about this, perhaps in that way, or on your channel at some point. Or anyone else, actually. Adam Meakin, my friend, call me back and tell me where I'm wrong. But I think that, using the triangles, you obscure and you don't use, this is not you, this is the maths, doesn't use the actual trajectory of a round shape. It forces straight lines into what should be something round. Hey, look who's here. It's wife Andrea. Hey, darling.
Wife Andrea, you've got many wives.
Shane says hi. Thanks. Hey, Dave. Thanks for that that information. Actually, it was really nice to get that.
Yeah, it kind of changed my day, didn't it?
Yeah, Andrea was feeling a bit like, what the heck are we doing this for? Where's it going? And which something that we have to ask ourselves all the time, particularly when we've thrown ourselves into the fire.
Yeah, sometimes it just, the ride seems so crazy, and need to make sense of it, but I think it's important reflection time.
Yeah, we don't know where the wheels are turning to, but we think that this is important. This, not necessarily the 8 inches, although I'm bamboozled too. I don't want to be putting bamboozling out there. The last thing I wanted to be doing is putting stuff that is obfuscating the truth of the insanity of a globe world. And then, of course, where do we go with that? Where do we take ourselves? And I don't want to keep fighting. I'm not looking to go and get into some sort of long-term debate with the 8-inch team or the flat team. Sorry, not the flat team, the globe team. I don't want to get into that because, again, these are rabbit holes within rabbit holes that are designed to hold us. Not sure what that other thing is all the time, but as Andrew said. Oh, then there you go. It's thank you, Bob, for saying that. Yeah. All right. Well. Yeah. I really. Joey, I haven't had a chance. Electromagnetic torus fields and how you've got a hot one and a cold one interacting, a masculine and a feminine one interacting, and they together turn within each other. They're actually sort of married together or coming close together, and perhaps the expression, the black hole or the center of each of these is what we observe as our sun and our moon, turning each of them individually, the cold one and the hot one. I haven't answered satisfactorily for myself in this theory of what the sky is, whether that's a third torus, and it's like the expression of the heart, the two threes connecting, which encapsulate the hot and the cold. That's your trinity, and that creates the center point, which typically I've drawn like this with the aurora, if you like, coming out the center. But I also wonder about it as a planar model, where it's actually lifting up like this, and it's kind of you've got like a hot one and a cold one next to each other. It is a different way of thinking about it, because typically I'd like to think about the hot torus being the one that's pushing up the magma. This is why it's relevant to you, Joey. And the hot one pushes up the magma, and the cold one pushes down the cold. This hot one pushes down the cold, which is why things at higher temperatures are frozen solid, rock solid, and equally down at the bottom they're kind of melted to liquid. But as the liquid comes up and meets the cold, so the cold cools the liquid hot rock to solid, and equally the heat encountering some of the cold stuff on in the upper atmospheres, upper regions. The heat encountering that causes the melting, which we know as water and the rain and so on. There's just some other stuff I've been chewing over for the last few days. Thought I might share that with you. I did the Trinity Torus model back a year and a half ago. My good friend Martin Kenny told me the Trinity Torus. I think that it describes like an owl's eyes, and the plumage and the beak. You know what I mean? That's the 8, the 2 threes, and then the hot and cold side by side, and then the turning of 24-hour turning, which creates your arrival of your sun and your moon. Food for thought, grist for the mill, and thought I'd share that with you. This place that I'm staying at is fascinating in so many different ways, and I'm really hoping to get the time to put together. My mate Nigel gave us an old laptop, and it's got Windows Movie Maker on it, so I'm hoping to put together something, fairly useful that people might enjoy watching, particularly those that, think in terms of mud floods and epochs. And I think partly why Andrea was feeling a little miffed this morning was like this idea. We were listening to Wakey Mark Knight was talking on some stuff we'd been sent, and in terms of cyclical events, epochs, and end times and cataclysms, and so on, shit's going to hit the fan in such a way that we get a mud flood or an event that means that everything we've been working towards in the physical world goes away. Perhaps this is why we're meant to be working on stuff in the spiritual world, or perhaps that's just fear porn, designed to stop you from, keep you in that low vibration and stop you from doing that higher stuff. I honestly don't know. My truth is that, I'm preparing myself, mind, body, and soul, much as I can, in the circumstances, for any eventuality, and to work this all out. Then we should just keep working on it. As it's our, I think, calling, or it's our spiritual destiny to work these things out, and not wanting to be achieving anything other than seeking for that truth about who and what we are, but not get lost in the hunt. As I say that, a guy who's the assistant manager, he has a loathing for pigeons and squirrels, and he walks around with an air gun a lot, actually. He's just walked past the front gate of these stables that I'm staying at. As I said that, oh well, I guess that's maybe a sign to say it's been nice chatting to you. And Bob from Globebuster stopped in and says he can't really. He's like, we're going to have to talk some more. Hope you, in fact, thank you, Ricardo. You may not have been on long enough to hear me say that we've got another week at this place, and then we'll be on the road. Not sure where it's leading us, but don't ask me anything before I sign off for the day. It has been nice. I do appreciate you coming by. Bob, if you do hear this still, maybe if it's not for your show, maybe JERAN would be willing to let me throw a little Globus is shill, Roxanne is shill. Who's that guy? And why doesn't he get timed out, I wonder? I don't suppose you're still here. Is that Wint James or something? I can't really see that. Well, I haven't met Bob, but I have met Roxanne, and I doubt very much that she's a shill, I have to say. We don't agree on everything, but she's definitely not a shill in my view. And I think that Bob and Cammy are good, decent people working really, really hard to help unpick some of this stuff. So I think you might just have earned yourself a dismissal. Yeah. So that's that. Anyway, it's been fun, and I hope that that's not been too long-winded, and I hope I've been able to make 8 p.m. UK time. No, I can do that. Definitely that time. All right. Perhaps you can facilitate that. I am obviously operating from a mobile phone, so my presentation, if I get to do any, will be of a very old school nature, with the tires and the wheels and things like that. But really, it would be nice to be in a bit of a 2-way, 3-way, 4-way conversation with people about that. And I can't think of anyone else better to sort of have the conversation with and really thrash that through. So thank you very much. So you can facilitate that, Ed. Would love to have you. That's very nice of you to say. Thank you so much, Bob. And I shall look forward to that on this Friday, which is today's Monday. I will look forward to that. What did that say, that last one? I'm sorry, my eyes are not so great. We have all been taught to associate Earth with the globe since birth. Absolutely. But now, as we're into disproving the globe, we've been taught to associate a very level, fairly level, gently sloping initial 100 square miles, 50 square miles around us. Because it's 8 inches in every direction around me. Just off the top of my head, that would mean, what would that mean, like 4 square miles or something? It wouldn't be long before, you go out to 5 miles and 5 by 5 by 5. What is that? 125, something like that, square miles. That's a large area that I think only has about 40 inches or something of curvature. Sorry, 200 inches of curvature. That's not a slam dunk. That's a pretty flat spot on an otherwise very steep surface. So, we've ideated that over this so much that we see it in our minds. And I'm just like you. I see that 8 inches per mile squared, theoretical 8 inches per mile squared, how it could be that people might observe it. But if I said it's 3,000, if we all went out into the street and said, it's 3,000 inches in the first mile, how many people would need convincing that, so long as you could show them that the maths, the way it's formulated or calculated or would be expressed, and whether you have to halve it because someone's, I won't go back over the detail, but, so long as you can kind of express it and say, look, this is how the maths forms for it, it's 3,000 inches, that's not there. You don't need to talk about curvature again. That's immediately out of the park. And now it's like, well, let's get on with showing you what else they've deceived you about. So that's why I think it it matters for all those reasons. Is what people use to hide the speed. People say, oh, look, take this tennis ball and move it 15 degrees an hour. Do you think there's going to be any wind? Well, it's not a tennis ball. It's a 24,000 mile circumference tennis ball. So that's a very different thing when you move it at 15 degrees. At the spindle, it's not moving at all. At the extent, it's moving at, 8,000, whatever. It doesn't matter. 12,000 miles in 12 hours, essentially. It's moving, 1,000 miles an hour. We know that. What were you saying there? That was... the other thing I thought about was the ether turning, which we all know, and I know that Bob's gyroscope thing was misused to try and obfuscate again that we're not on a moving platform. But we know that the stars move and things all move around us, but they move at a different speed to the sun, I think. So, and the moon. So it is the third wheel. I think there are more than 3, but let's just say the primary wheels are these 3, as I was saying, the Trinity. And does that mean that the sky is the ether, and the ether is the third wheel? The ether is the heart, which is the center, and this neutral soup that turns the wheel of the sky. So that's on its own timetable, and we know that is a wobbling thing. It's not stable in the same way as the sun is pretty much really stable and follows the same line week after week, and then gently moves out towards Capricorn, etc. Well, the moon, on the other hand, jiggles and piggles from month to month. Let me see if I can turn this camera around and I can show you what I was talking about. Whoops. I can't zoom now because this thingy is in the way. From Martin Leaker's neck of the woods. So we've got to make certain excuses for that. Anyway, so yeah, this sky might be the third Taurus, and it's turning and at its own rate, and has its own particular wobble, which we call the precession of the equinoxes. Anyway, I'm going to call it a day there, guys. I am... someone's running. We don't want to do this, when you've got 20,000 on a... if we dumped what we found right now, it would be bad. Oh, yeah, I think that's think what you like. I've had a personal conversation with Cami, and she's as real a person as I could hope to encounter. Bob's, in that order of sincerity that, he's like a guy that you want to be able to meet down the pub for a glass of distilled water or whatever. And I know from my own experience of, going in front of the camera for this flat earth business, is that they can choose what they use, and they can crop and cut and paste things in any way. But you see, I think, I have never spoken to Bob about this, but I think that one of the things that I would say is that if people don't accept that there is an ether, then it's very difficult to reconcile with the fact that something is demonstrably shown to be moving. Something is in flux, other than wind or whatever. But on a still day, I know that without any wind, without any clouds, whatever, when I look up into the sky and I see the Orion's belt traveling sort of across the southern sky, when I watch that over the course of hours, I know that it is part of a body that is moving, and it's that body of movement, the ether, that I say is what they're picking up with the ring gyro. And if you haven't thought about this yourself, but you should think that if this was possible, that we could prove the Earth was a rotating sphere, or not even a sphere, but that it was actually in some form moving against something else. Don't you think that the mainstream deGrasse Tysons and co would be all over that like stink on shit? Think about it. If it in any way, if it takes that documentary to prove to the science community that an experiment that they've never done for themselves, that they don't use as a benchmark to prove their rotation theory, mockumentary is going to be the place that truth finally is brought to light in a scientific experiment. So, and anyway, what are you doing watching Netflix? Netflix is poison for the mind. To be fair, it did help me along the way, because I started watching things that were like, yes. I carried on through that, and but say what you like. People used to say that getting out there on the national TV was a proof of shilldom, but my man Russian Vids has even had to retract his own scathing remarks about people who got a little bit of airtime. I'm not saying that all people that get airtime don't have their own kind of little agenda necessarily running in the background. However, we have to acknowledge medium. You can be like, if you're into the debunking the flat earth, you could be a Simon Dan, barely, literate dude, put together a scratchy video, and you'll get millions of views because the system wants that. But to get stuff out that people are thinking about, that documentary has been played back, as people have recited that to me so much in the street, that it really was an amazing coup, if you like, for getting some information out there, albeit disinformation. In some senses, disinformation. I mean, I think that I think that it's actually woken a bunch of people up to that there's something to look at here. So, me myself, I am not of the criticizing that group. I would say to Mark Sargent now, look, if we can prove this 8 inches per mile squared, I'd say, hey, listen, now you really can't be going around saying 8 inches per mile squared. That would be a continuation of what we be in a plainly obvious globe to the casual observer at a very low. All of that, it's just, it should be looking much more spherical from their perspective. Anyway, I have belabored that, and yeah, you can definitely get rid of that dude. I'm happy to block that character. No, I don't have much time for that. Sorry. And go to no one got Globe Light Tour had less than 30 people show up for their after party. Okay, you know what? That's true. I have to maybe no, not less than 30 people. I would say that's a slight under representation of the truth. But you're right in that sense. Whatever your name is, Norman Conquest. Hey, you know my surname comes from the Norman, apparently from the Norman Conquest. But you're being rude, and I'm going to just give you a timeout while I tell you what I think. You think blocking people on YouTube is how you... well, no, I mean, I think that's a good question. You know, should you be blocking people? Well, I think that people who are genuinely looking. But you see, when you've been looking at this for a few years, you realize that people are either unable to see for various reasons, that's another debate, and people are intentionally not wanting to see. And like, you know, in 2015, 2016, I was very active in Facebook, and I was trying very hard in Facebook groups to convince people that there was no curvature to water and that water was level. And then I was talking about 8 inches per mile squared, etc. But whatever it is, water is, in our physical observable reality, you have two choices. You either, you say, well, I'm going to try and express to this person, that they live in some sort of made up reality, or I'm going to let them continue living in their made up reality. I tried a lot, and now I try a little bit. I mean, if someone in the street approaches me that really doesn't want to see it, I'm like, fine. I have lost a few hours here and there. I'm sure if you've watched my channel a bit, you'll know that I've sometimes had longer conversations than I should have done with people who are clearly not ready, able, or capable to see water level. So it's not that it's a disrespect thing, but it's just a realization that there is a higher thing playing here. This is not just a simple case of black is white or white is black. This is something much more divine or sort of God level stuff that's going on that stops people from being able to see, spend a lot of your time or allow you to spend a lot of my time exercising ourselves over something that you're possibly never going to be able to see. And I'd love for you to see it. And my true hope was when I was, that we would be a year or two and then the world would know. It would be as simple as pointing out the water around us. But even with laser tests and other experiments that people have done that show that we can't find any bulge in any body of water, people still don't want to see that. And that's something in that person, and it's going to make that person angry, or resentful or whatever, that other people can see something that they can't, or as most people are programmed to think that, well, you can't see something and that's obviously there even though you can't see it. That must make you, a retard. And that's where a lot of the flat Earth, the globe kind of version of what flat earthers must be, And think about it honestly. Why would you go around visit a friend whose dogs were biting at you every time you visited them? You know what I mean? You'd be like, listen, put your dogs in a cage or I ain't coming around. And I'm afraid when it comes to the flat, I got out of that in 2016, 2017. I was like, you know what, I can't do this because there always going to be an and I'm not, and you can argue with me, you can spend hours and hours and hours of your time laying out these really good explanations, but I'm going to remain wedded to the authority that I was born into. And my friends, or this man who's giving Bob a bit of a hard time now, or, in the trolling, it's not about that I don't want to have debate. Right now, I'm having debate, if you've been listening to any of this, I'm having debate with my own sort of community, if you like it, to call it like that, of flat earthers, and saying, hey, have we got this, maybe this is something else that we need to review, and this is something else that we follow my channel for a while, and go, Dave, when I talk about some subjects, they're like, you're losing it, and I don't block them. I try and engage them in conversation and then recognize perhaps that we don't have to agree on everything. But, what comes from ballers is like it's almost like it's like I don't want to say childish. That's really not where I'm looking to take this conversation. My battery's nearly dead. It's just like it's like a never-ending spiral of I'm not willing to look at the stuff that you got. And for us, we've done this, man. You might be a year in, 6 months in, 6 weeks into finding out that the Earth. Some people are saying the Earth is flat, and you're looking to defend your balls like a rabid dog. Why should I waste my time on that? Please. You have to realize this is not about disrespecting anyone, but you come here and disrespect some of the people on my thing, then I'm going to be less likely to want to have you around. So you, whatever your name is, I can barely see the screen now because you have been blocked. But I mean, if you change your mind, if you realize that there is something worth debating and you want to give up on the masters that you are trying to defend, the master's education, then by all means come on back and have a chat. But you can email me my email's all over the place. And if you're in a position to send us a few quid to help us on this little mission, then trinityforman@gmail.com on PayPal. If you can, that would be awesome. But God will provide for this. This is to have courage, and we're meant to face the dark. Because the light will shine again, but it needs to come out in the dark. Friends, it's been awesome. It's been a privilege. I can't read. My screen's gone dark because... Let me see if I can get a battery pack. I don't want to be rude and cut you all off in your conversation, but... Where's the battery, man? Are you? Okay, so I got it on. I had 1% battery. So, Oh, Bob, you know what? I just want to say I'm sorry that you've. I know you're really good at being in the trenches, but that you've had to. Yeah, that you had to deal with that. I mean, I only get a little bit. You guys must get it hardcore, with people calling you out, but I feel bad about that. Yeah, I'm sorry for that, my friend. Can I send a link to my PayPal? I don't know if I can send a link, Ricardo. I mean, it's just trinityforman@gmail.com in PayPal. I could try and send a link. I need to get a little bit better at asking for help. We do need it, but someone said to me a while ago, God will provide what you need when you need it. And right now we have a fire. I'll show you the fire, although I need to put some more wood in it. I've been talking for such a long time. There's the fire, and there's the wood. And I won't go all the way around because Andrew's feeding Alexander.
I'm about to make a veg curry.
Okay. This is what Amber Punk. I just need to get rid of somebody quickly, because again, how did I attract so many of these funny types? Hired user on this channel. How did I attract that? I do apologize for that, guys. Anyway, anyone who doesn't want to believe it's flat can go on believing the lie. We know the truth. It's so easy to see. Yeah. Does it matter that everybody sees it in the end? I don't know that it does. I don't know if it really, really matters that everybody gets to see this. But it feels like we have to. I've been talking about this with Andrew because we're like, whoa, what are we doing? And why are we putting ourselves through all of this kind of travail? And where's it going to lead us to,
What's the purpose?
And what is the purpose? But I've been, I guess a bit like Bob and Cami, I've been motivated to do something for years now. And, the first year of Alexander's life, I was already like eager, but I was so busy being a father to him, supporting my wife. But I'm absolutely eager, and, I don't mind that people can't see it. I think I have to get over that idea that everybody's going to see it. And I think it probably doesn't matter, because the light is more powerful in the end.
You've got to respect that other people are on their own path.
Look, hello, saddle room action. And there's the little boy just kind of coming through his little sleep. So I've taken advantage of that and given this a really good tonk on the curvature thing. But hey, Bob and all the others listening who are thinking about the maths on this, is that if we can demonstrate 0.6 or 0.3, I'm not invested in what it is, amount of curvature for the expression of a ball, and the sphericity of that ball, and from that point on, it's the same amount of bend, the same amount of curvature, and in that case, we should be able to formulate that and come to a number 0.3, 0.6. Don't mind, even 0.1 is so much curvature as to be instantly expression of any reality that you and I and every baller even has ever encountered. You have to go onto a mountain, pretty steep mountain, to be in a situation where things are falling away from you at that kind of ratio. Your view should be out into a sort of, into an airscape rather than, apologies for the trollery in the room. And, we love you all. It's not a matter of that, but at the same time, we don't have time for a meeting of the Ball Earth Society. And that's really where I'm at with that. So apologies. And hey, hopefully Friday, 8:00, I'll be on JERAN's show talking to Bob and JERAN and whoever else about this again. And let's see what kind of traction we can make with that. That's 8 p.m. UK time. So I look forward to seeing you there, and I thank you once again for stopping by. I do appreciate your support, and we're at trinityforman@gmail.com if you want to send me an email, or if you're in a position to bung us a few quid. If not, then that's fine. We'll only get what we need as we need it anyway. So we're here for another week. Very little overheads, just a little bit of groceries, which is fantastic. And it's given me all this head time to think about some other things. So much love, friends, and thanks for stopping.